This is episode number 143 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. First, before we get started though, let's have a quick chat about our sponsor, 1791 Gunleather. Centuries ago, the original patriots of this country fought and died for promises they protected in the Constitution. Chief among those promises was the right to bear arms. Now, generations later, 1791 protects that right and our firearms. Makers of the 2020 Holster of the Year, the end results of every 1791 holster is a mastery of craft and function, customizable to any firearm you require. 1791 Gunleather provides in the way only an American company can. For more information, visit 1791gunleather.com. Today, I'm going on a rant as I take on the task of defending something which really doesn't need defending, the weaver stance. The idea of the weaver's become so polarizing among the shooters that it's almost comical, since most opinions you hear aren't really based in reality. Speaking as somebody who does have a considerable bit of experience with both the weaver stance and Gunsight Academy, I'll give my reasons why the whole controversy is a bit overblown, just like pretty much everything else in life today. Now, let's discuss You Don't Know Jack about the weaver stance. Well, I haven't received my usual allocation of death threats lately, so I thought maybe it's time to go back into the deep end of the controversy pool. So here's my idea. I think it might be time to ban the term weaver stance. Now, before anybody starts concocting plans to roast my gizzard on a spit and serve it with fava beans, let me explain what I'm talking about. If you've been living under a rock for the last half century, the weaver stance is the basic body position used as the foundation of the modern pistol technique developed by Colonel Jeff Cooper. He coined the phrase after watching Jack Weaver, who was a Los Angeles County deputy sheriff, kicking everybody's fanny during Cooper's famous leather slap pistol competitions in the late 1950s. Colonel Cooper saw how much more effective Weaver's body position was for pistol shooting instead of the other techniques that were popular at the time. Most shooters were still using some variation of the single-handed crouch and below-the-eye instinctive shooting. I don't know what they all thought the sights on a gun were for, but this was gunfighting in the 1950s. Cooper's observations led him to incorporate Weaver's then unusual stance into the modern technique. Cooper developed this so-called modern technique to serve as the basis of curriculum for his revolutionary American Pistol Institute in Paulden, Arizona, now known as Gunsight Academy. Many of us also call it Disneyland for guns, though I'm sure the woke Disney Corporation is horrified at that moniker. Now today, even 40-plus years later, the modern technique and weaver stance are still the foundation of Gunsight's teaching. Overall, it remains one of the most widely accepted professional methodologies for employing a fighting firearm. Of course, though, there are folks who are never satisfied by the status quo and thus have developed other means and methods for using a gun in social circumstances. That in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, because of all the trigger time we've gained during our latest series of War to End All Wars, some of these alternative techniques were used successfully to perforate bad people and have gained popularity, especially with the new is always better crowd. Internet warriors, I'm talking to you. Unfortunately, this proliferation of technique of the week experts added steam to the argument put forth by that loud minority who view the modern technique and the weaver stance as outdated, old-fashioned, and the shrinking natural habitat of the endangered Southwest Dinosaur League. In fact, on certain shooting ranges, relying on the weaver stance is tantamount to admitting you still drive a Model T and rely on carrier pigeon for your daily mail service. Against this backdrop of current affairs, the weaver stance has become a polarizing, all-or-none proposition. Either you're for it, or you ain't. However, the interesting thing I've noticed in my role as a gun media gadabout is that most of the critics don't really know what they're talking about in the first place. When discussing the supposed weak points of the weaver stance, they point to certain facts that either have no basis in reality or are simply exaggerated out of, ignorance or malice. In other words, many of these folks refuse to let the facts get in the way of a good argument. The real truth is that even Gunsight, the keeper of the Weaver flame, is always analyzing, adapting, and updating things, and now considers the basic modern technique shooting position as a quote-unquote fighting stance, rather than employing the strict Weaver of popular mythology. This more accurate terminology highlights the fact that the position initially, quote-unquote, discovered by Jack Weaver was actually the same stance used by fighters since the first caveman bashed in the skull of a tribe mate who tried to swipe the last brontosaurus burger. In truth, all the great warrior groups of history have employed this same fighting stance in various incarnations. In fact, if you superimpose the likeness of a Roman centurion preparing for battle over a photo of Jack Weaver, the similarities are striking. I think the biggest problem is the Weaver stance is often incorrectly imagined or explained as a strict set of geometric body positions by, I'll be charitable here, the less educated or highly dogmatic. In fact, of all the arguments I've had with people regarding this matter, at some point every one of them has had to admit a bit sheepishly, well, I've never actually been to Gunsight, but a lot of my former instructors have. Right. And I've stayed at a Holiday Inn, so I should be able to fly 747. Let's contrast these rigid ideas of Weaver against what Gunsight actually teaches today. They tell students to take a natural fighting stance by simply dropping your strong side foot back enough and lowering your center of gravity enough that you're stable. In this position, when shooting a pistol, your strong side arm is mostly straight and your support arm and elbow are pointed toward the ground in a comfortable manner. Notice that there was no elbow rigidly locked, body precisely X degrees from the target, or feet exactly 14.53 inches apart kind of instructions in there. That is not how Gunsight, nor its multi-generational family tree of instructors, explains the basic shooting stance. Rather, they want students to simply maintain a well-balanced, highly mobile fighting position that is comfortable for the way your body is built and operates. Nothing more, nothing less. Compare this less is more description with what you may have heard from an internet commando or erstwhile instructor who knows everything there is to know about the Weaver stance because he watched an internet video. For extra bonus points, notice how the critic inadvertently uses elements of the modern technique because honestly, there's a good chance his own family tree of trainers probably did train or work at Gunsight sometime in the past. He or she just doesn't realize it. One other point I want to make, even Gunsight will let you shoot in whatever position you want so long as it's safe. They ask you to try it their way to see if it works better, but they're not going to hit you with a swagger stick if you decide an isosceles stance works better for you. After all, it's a fighting school, and if you can move and hit safely doing it your way, the mission has ultimately been accomplished. So, these are my reasons why, with all due respect to Weaver, I believe it might be time to entirely drop the name Colonel Cooper coined. I hate rewriting history for the sake of expediency, but the name Weaver has been so spindled, folded, and mutilated in the shooter's lexicon that it might be time to respectfully retire this honorific in order to shuck all this unnecessary baggage. Jack Weaver was an innovator who did something unusual. He applied age-old fighting techniques to the art of pistol shooting at a time when everybody else was doing something very different. For that, he deserves to be applauded and remembered. But maybe it's time to give Jack a rest. Hopefully I shed a little light on the Weaver stance controversy, and maybe folks will stop getting their undergarments in such a wad on the topic. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening to the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first on the newsstand, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course you can always listen at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, please don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at americanhandgunner.com, americancop.com, and our numerous special editions available for sale on our websites. Most of all, while you're online, I would really appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent T. Now get out there and get shooting.